From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and thank you so much for joining us. We have a great show today. We're going to talk about the Iranian war, what's happening there, radical terrorism. Those obviously are linked. The terrorist acts in Austin, in Old Dominion, the Michigan shooter. In just the last few weeks, we've had a number of radical Muslims who have been led in this country primarily by Biden and Obama, many of them actually naturalized, rising up and killing people in the name of Allah, in the name of Iran, in the name of the Palestinians, and of course the radical left are marching in the streets trying to defend them, not talking about the Americans who are being killed. We're also going to spend some time, of course, we're in week 4 of the John Cornyn, Ken Paxton, unknown Donald Trump endorsement matter going on. And looks like in the absence of a Trump endorsement, perhaps even with one, Cornyn's really going to struggle. We're going to spend time, a good bit of time, what it means. Texas has a situation where Texas has gone pro-big business at the expense of free enterprise. We're going to break that down and get into it. If we have time, we're going to speak to the runoff concerning Beau French as well at the railroad commissioner, and obviously the growth of Muslims in Texas and what that means. It's lip service by our state representatives and senators to say we've banned Sharia law. That is not banning the values that are harming our Judeo-Christian values here. And those are very different. And then today will be our inaugural episode with the Tepper time. This is a situation where an establishment Republican who's well-funded, over $1 million by TLR, has been complaining in the public arena. So we're going to dedicate a portion of the show, and we'll call it Tepper time, to just make sure everybody is aware of what's happening in Texas. So hold on to your hats, folks. We have a big show, and if we can get to it, I'm a little concerned we won't, but if we can get to it, we're going to get into some of the vaccine choice issues as well. In the not-so-distant future, we'll dive deeply into vaccine choice in Texas, what's happening, who is still being harmed from it. They're forcing the shot upon more people than you would expect.
Thanks, Anthony. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. We'll keep you informed on new episodes, new guests, and new opportunities for your voice to be heard across Texas. Learn more and sign up today at politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks. Anthony Holm here, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and this is going to be our inaugural portion of something that we're calling Tepper time. This is after an establishment-type moderate Republican state rep from Lubbock. His name is Carl Tepper. He received over $1 million in donations from TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform, when he ran for office. I think that was 90+% of his campaign donations. So now Tepper's complaining quite publicly that folks listening to this show may not understand that in addition to being a conservative activist, a consultant to both the Republican House caucus and the Republican Senate caucus over the years, and representing some of the most prominent conservatives in Texas, that I'm also a lawyer who actually goes to trial. All of you listeners know that I'm a lawyer and I go to trial. That's what I enjoy doing. And I have tried very hard to separate the show from my law practice, but now, frankly, just kind of go along, get along moderates are complaining because we're having an effect. Here's my Tepper time disclaimer. I primarily litigate 18-wheeler cases and injuries from large commercial vehicles like dump trucks. And in large part because, as crazy as it is, but some years ago, I went to full-time truck driving school. I spent 4 months of my life training on how to drive semis. I drove them up and down I-35 and qualified fully on semis. It was hard. It was a very humbling experience. And, you know, some of the folks who do it, it's kind of a job of last resort. I think we've made a mistake there. Maybe I'll get into a segment on that at another time. But I know them well. I drove them up and down the highway. So I was also credentialed to drive 18-wheelers, which haul liquids like milk, because it's difficult. And it's more difficult to safely pull a tanker with a liquid that's sloshing around. It requires special training beyond normal truck driving school. And I also trained and got credentialed to haul hazardous materials like gasolines or explosives. That, too, the specialized training. So now most of my law practice involves injuries from heavy vehicles or 18-wheelers, because of my unique training and specialized skills in this area. But as you all, the listeners know, I also have training called an LLM, Specialized Masters in Law in Antitrust, the subject matter of antitrust. Few lawyers go and get LLMs because it requires even more school after you graduate law school. So I'm a highly trained with an LLM in antitrust. Basically, I'm an antitrust geek. I like it, and I have an awful lot of information on it. So the fact is, I'm a Christian conservative type lawyer who knows these issues better than most, the heavy dump trucks and 18-wheelers and antitrust, and I have a deep background as a conservative activist, championing issues and electing conservatives for close to 3 decades. But the Carl Teppers of the world, primarily those moving bad policy because of $1 million type donations, the go along, get along guys, well, they're getting exposed by us, by you and me and others who are paying attention. So now they're complaining. They're saying, well, he's not telling enough people he's a lawyer. Okay, no problem. Yes, folks, no shock to any of you. I don't think it's anybody who listens here regularly doesn't know I'm a lawyer. But in my 30s, I went back to law school, and I graduated from UT Law in 2004, so 22-ish years ago. So this concludes our Tepper time disclaimer. These moderate Republicans like Tepper just simply cringe at being called out for trying to move bad policy. For example, one of the things we talked about, one of the bills that died, thank goodness, last session, and Tepper co-authored it. It was a bill protecting foreign truck drivers who can't speak English, and it protects them when they crash India. So that's bad policy, just period. In fact, President Trump, thank goodness, right in the middle of the session, he issued an executive order last year that said not being able to read or speak English is a safety violation that should stop anybody from being able to drive an 18-wheeler on America's roads. So this happened in the same month. Tepper was trying to pass, as his co-author of this bill, protecting foreign truck drivers who can't speak or read English and crash into you. Tepper actually opposes President Trump's and common sense on this issue. So I was public. I exposed the bill for what it was. Others too, right? A lot of conservatives stepped up and said, wait a second, we're not going to do this. This is a violation of conservative values. And frankly, just a violation of common sense. So ultimately, the bad bill died last session. And thank God, or we'd have even more dangerous semi-trucks on this roads with us here in Texas. But these rhinos and Democrats who get massive donations from a single lobby group like Tepper, got more than $1 million, and then seek to move bad policy almost assuredly because they got $1 million from the group, well, guess what? They hate that we caught them. They hate that you and me and others, conservatives, we exposed them. And it worked. It killed their bill. But they hate being caught. They squirm, they hem, they haw, they deny it, they speak in half-truths as a response, and then ultimately they hide their faces in shame and hope the issue dies quickly. Well, that's what happened. So that's what happened to Tepper's effort to protect foreign truck drivers who can't speak English. But now they're out there complaining about me being a lawyer who actually understands and calls out what they're trying to do. So that's why we now have what we'll forever call Tepper time on this show.
Love what you're hearing? Find all of our shows at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Subscribe to our newsletter and send in your questions. politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks. Well, let's start with the U.S. Senate race, the runoff, actually, here in Texas. So John Cornyn, incumbent U.S. Senator for 24 years, spent, $70 million on his campaign. Outside forces spent closer to $100 million. He and Ken Paxton, and of course Wesley Hunt, were in the initial race. He and Ken Paxton are in the runoff. I believe that's the 26th of May. And what's really striking to me are a few different things. 3 items of interest here. Number one, Cornyn and Paxton were about a point apart in the first round. So that means the majority of the voters opposed the 24-year incumbent John Cornyn. He got, as I recall, about 41.5% of the vote. Ken Paxton got about 40.5%. Now, as I said a moment ago, the Cornyn forces spent a combined roughly $100 million, primarily just tearing down Ken Paxton. What I have read is Paxton's combined forces spent about $4 million, and Wesley Hunt combined forces, that being the campaign and outside PACs and interest groups on his advocating for him, spent what looks like about $10 million. So now we're going to a runoff, and Washington, D.C., John Thune, the entirety of the swamp up there just assumed that Cornyn was going to be endorsed by Donald Trump. Frankly, he may still be, but that hasn't occurred. So we're now in week 4 after the election, and every day that doesn't occur, Ken Paxton, I think, is getting much stronger. It's much more likely that he is elected. So we here know that, obviously, all of us are aware of Ken Paxton's faults, let's say it that way, being gracious. And yet, virtually everybody who's conservative and interested in strong policy outcomes is supporting Ken Paxton just because of his incredible body of work. Inversely, John Cornyn's been in Washington, D.C. as a U.S. Senator for 24 years, and most of us tend to think Washington has largely failed. So it'll be very interesting to see where this race goes. I believe very strongly that every day the support for Paxton is hardening, independent of the D.C. money effort. And the prediction markets like Kalshi and the other quote-unquote betting markets where there's $10 or $12 million that people have put on predictive analysis have recently had Ken Paxton overtake John Cornyn. So I'm curious, even if, A, does Trump endorse at all, and B, if he does, then what? Is it not a Ken Paxton coin flip probably, or perhaps even favoring him? That's just my gut. I think his crew did a really fascinating political maneuver, and that was this. They came out and said, well, look, if John Cornyn and the Senate will pass the SAVE Act that Trump wants, which mandates photo ID for federal elections nationwide, go figure. If it will pass the SAVE Act, which the U.S. House has already passed, it says, hey, everybody has have a photo ID if you want to come and vote. They can only force that upon federal elections. Then I'll consider dropping out of the race. Fascinating move, because Thune and the moderate even though Republicans control the Senate, just are unwilling to pass it. There's at least 2 Republicans who won't pass it. It's shocking. 80+% of America says, yeah, of course you should have a photo ID to vote. I mean, this is a sacred right, and we need one to rent a car or get into an R-rated movie. You show a photo ID for everything. So it's just nonsensical that we wouldn't do it in this voting. We're having so many voting irregularities. Well, that put Cornyn in a real pickle, in my opinion, politically in a pickle, and to some extent Trump as well, because he's like, wow, Paxton and his crew are trying to help me get this through. And Thune and Cornyn, who, of course, ran for majority leader of the U.S. Senate, lost to Thune. I think he got second in the voting, as I recall, aren't getting it done, aren't pushing it through. Well, interestingly, Ron Johnson, a U.S. Senator, Republican from Wisconsin. So Ron Johnson is a solid conservative, but he's from a swing state at best, or even a purple state, Wisconsin. He said, look, he came out publicly, we got to end the filibuster and just go past this, because Democrats, if they get control of the Senate, they're going to end the filibuster and pass all their crazy liberal stuff. Cornyn wasn't there. Has never been there. He did finally succumb, like kind of bending the knee to conservative values, from at least from my perspective, and said, okay, let's do a talking filibuster where these guys have to talk themselves to death to keep the floor, and eventually when they run out of things to say in the middle of the night, we'll have a quick vote and we'll pass it. It's just not credible, not realistic. All of everyone in Washington, D.C. said that. And then Cornyn came out and said, well, we should do a talking filibuster or whatever is required to pass it, because we have to pass the SAVE Act. You know, he's been up there for 24 years. To think that we don't have photo ID mandates already is pretty shocking on its face. Though moderate Republicans have traditionally been very difficult on the issue. I've spoken a number of times on the show about I was one of the leaders of that effort in the Texas legislature, and when we had a Republican House, it took several sessions to push that through. We had to go actually defeat some people in the primary over it. And folks like you, listeners who care about policy, have engaged very heavily to that end. It's just shocking to me that here we are in week 4, and Trump hasn't weighed in. We just blew $100 million. Our incumbent senator of 24 years, John Cornyn, had 60% of the electorate vote against him. And I think all of us who watch politics and participate in runoff tend to agree that the electorate who are going to show up in the end of May and to vote in that runoff are some of the most conservative. It's folks like you and I and listening to the show and engage in it who are 5-time, 6-time Republican primary voters, and we show up for all the runoffs. I think Paxton's probably going to do really well, but you never know. We shall see. What is also very interesting about this dynamic is the D.C. swamp is saying, hey, Cornyn will do better against a Democrat. And now we know who the Democrat is, Talarico. Well, then you got to ask, like, I think it was Mitch Little, a conservative state rep from North Texas, who sent a tweet. Well, predicated on that belief is that he will do better because he's more moderate on policy. Is that what we really want? It was the implications of that notion. Hey, Trump, endorse the more moderate guy because he'll do better in the general, and then probably stay pretty moderate as he's been for 24 years, and you aren't going to get the SAVE Act. Or stay out of it and let the people vote. Or, shoot, if he ever endorsed Paxton, then it would just be game over. I think also the national movement, the conservative movement, came out and said, wait a second, Paxton's an all-in Trump guy. Cornyn's been totally against Trump. You can't possibly surrender the D.C. swamp and endorse this guy. It would be such a slap in the face to all the conservatives. So things just froze entirely. But I want to go ahead and skip ahead to who is Talarico. You know, everyone in D.C. is trying to say, oh, this James Talarico, he's got it. He's polling so well. He's this, he's that. Well, sure. Nobody knows anything about him. And Cornyn just spent $100 million basically tearing down Paxton, and Hunt spent about $10 million or $8 million tearing down Cornyn, and Paxton spent a few $1 million tearing down Cornyn. So the electorate has been exposed to basically the warts of the Republicans. But nobody has torn down or even just exposed Talarico for who he is. So let's talk about who James Talarico is. He has publicly said, we can play some of these clips, no question. He said, radicalized white men are the greatest threat to domestic terrorism in our country. Stop and think about that. He believes radicalized white men are the greatest terror threat in America. Not the radicalized Muslims who have been out slaughtering people in America the last several weeks. You know, the media is trying to downplay this because they're wanting to help the PLO and the Palestinians, and they're wanting to shame Trump over the Iranian war. But we have radicalized Muslims killing Americans all over the place. And we had a terrible, tragic event here recently in Austin where a radicalized Senegalese guy, a fellow from Senegal in West Africa, 53 years old, and became a naturalized citizen during the Obama era in 2013. He drove downtown Austin a couple weeks ago in a sweatshirt that said, "Property of Allah." And under that sweatshirt, he had a T-shirt on that showed the Iranian flag, the flag of Iran. And what did he do? He took an assault rifle and just started mowing people down. Killed 3 young people in their 20s right here in Austin, and 14 others injured. That's a radicalized Muslim, the same as that attacked in Old Dominion recently, in Virginia, the same profile of person who attacked in Michigan recently. But what is Talarico's take on it? Oh, they're not a threat. The real threat are the white men. This is pandering to the radical left, and it's not going to fly in a general election in Texas. What else did he say?
Did they teach you in Sunday school that Jesus Christ himself was a radical feminist? The American flag is such a complicated symbol for most of us. God is non-binary. You can't call yourself a Christian and reject the stranger seeking asylum at our southern border. Our trans community needs abortion care too. Modern science obviously recognizes that there are many more than 2 biological sexes. In fact, there are 6. Prophetic voices like Jesus have helped me reckon with my own whiteness. Our southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a giant welcome mat out front. We are trying to fundamentally change the politics in this state and in this country. No need to sit and cry over, your whiteness or your masculinity.
I happen to be strong in my faith, and I'm open to people's interpretation, but he has repeatedly said God is non-binary. God knows no gender. And often when he makes that statement, he says he's quite proud to be the first Texas Capitol office. So he's a state rep from the Pflugerville area north of Austin, or Williamson County. Maybe it doesn't actually have Pflugerville, but it's very near to it. Williamson County, just north of Austin. He said, we're quite proud to be the first Capitol office to use pronouns on our official business cards. We pay for those business cards, you and me. That's who Talarico is. And when James Talarico, the Democratic nominee for Senate, who's going to be facing either Ken Paxton or John Cornyn, is picked up by Washington, D.C., either they know this stuff and they're choosing to ignore it, which is a lie through admission to try to fool Donald Trump, or they're so behind and just so crazy to spend anything they can to get another 6 years of John Cornyn that they're overlooking who Talarico is. I suggest to you that James Talarico will be soundly defeated by whoever the nominee is, not because of who we nominate, but because of his own crazy, radical beliefs. James Talarico, and we'll play the clip here in a little bit, said, "Science has been clear. Modern science recognizes that there are many more than two sexes. In fact, there are 6. Let that set in. The Democrat Party in Texas just nominated a fella, a state representative, who is so crazy and radical. He says, no. In a public setting, by the way, in a committee hearing, in the legislature, there aren't 2 sexes. Science has clearly established there are, in fact, 6 sexes. Now, he didn't rattle off what the other 4 are, but come on. Is anybody going to vote for this fella to send him to the U.S. Senate when he's saying, oh, no, there aren't 2 sexes, there are actually 6? I mean, this is just insanity. God is non-binary. One incredible interview, he said, okay, outside of your family and your loved ones, who do you care about as a legislator? Trans children.
Something that you love that's not family or friends.
I love, I'm just saying this because it's on my mind, the trans children who showed up yesterday at the state capitol to advocate for their humanity. They shouldn't have to, but it was an inspiration to watch.
What does that mean? I mean, it's transsexual children who are being transitioned, I believe very strongly, being brainwashed by an adult. Find me any child who says, I'm really of the other sex. I'll find you an adult in their immediate space, giving them incredibly bad counsel, and I think it's probably child abuse, and it ought to be treated as such. That is his priority. Trans children, their real fear in America should be among white men, not radicalized Muslim terrorists. The first office to do pronouns with our tax dollars, and quite proud of that. Oh, he also said, our trans community needs access to abortion too. Look, my understanding is the fellow is single, so maybe there's more in the background about trans for the guy. I don't know. I've met him here and there along the way, but I don't claim to know him. But these are his words. These are his very clear public announcements and his policy positions and how he attacks and thinks about public policy, which is ultimately what I believe all of us on this show who listen and engage in politics, we defer to, and what generally the electorate defers to. Well, James Talarico is making his policies really clear. Number one, there are 6 sexes, not 2, and that's clearly defined by medical science. Number 2, his priority are trans children. He wants to ensure that white men are tracked and investigated at a much higher rate than radicalized Muslims, and that trans children and the trans community have access to abortions. The campaigns wouldn't even have to spend $100 million like Cornyn has to get into a runoff. They spend 5, 6, 8, not more than $10 million just showing Talarico in his own words, and it's over. This guy cannot get elected in Texas. I'm not sure he can get elected anywhere with this type of record, but they're in his own words, and he was serious. It's hard to believe that it is this excessive or extreme. That's what the Democratic Party has come to in Texas. Shocking that they aren't talking about, like, hey, let's figure out how to lower property taxes. I think the Republican Party is really open and vulnerable to that. We've controlled the Texas legislature for about 30 years now. Abbott's been, governor for 12, I think? And property taxes just go up, 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 up. Yet this guy wants to go out and talks about the 4 other sexes beyond male and female, how God is non-binary, and how white men are the threat, not radicalized terrorists, even though we're having mass shootings and in the name of Allah. Something we talked about before in this show that I'm personally very troubled by is just the massive jump in mosques and Muslims in Texas. And I'm not troubled because of a religion growing. I'm troubled that people are seeking out Texas, seeking out the United States, obviously, but certainly Texas, to live here who don't share our values. And again, Republicans, we've been in control of the state legislature for close to 30 years, if not 30 years. And Abbott, I think it's his 12th year in office. We have more mosques, I believe, than any state in the union. Certainly we have more mosques than per capita than any state in the union. And there are viral videos going around saying, move to Texas, all their children will pray to Allah. We will overcome. They tend not to learn English, tend to force women to wear burqas or headscarves. They're trying to establish their own schools. And Abbott and all of our legislators who are running on this issue are talking, hey, we're going to ban Sharia law. Hey, we ban Sharia law. Look, the Japanese government just banned mosques. They just banned the prayer whistle or prayer announcement throughout the day. They have banned most of the attire, if not all of the attire. I mean, how is Japan ahead of Texas on defending our own cultural values, our traditional family values, our Judeo-Christian beliefs here? We are a Judeo-Christian nation. And now everybody's wanting, all these Republican electeds are wanting to get on the bandwagon, but the folks who have been there for a long time are who I tend to look to. So we'll see what happens there, and certainly Paxton of those two has been on it. The other race will be an interesting contrast on this issue is Beau French. Beau French had been the Republican Party chairman of Tarrant County. He ran for railroad commissioner against an incumbent, and they're in a runoff. Well, Beau French has been one of the leaders on this recognition and anti-Muslim, anti-Islam growth in Texas for some time. He's just been out there real publicly and real aggressively trying to defend Texas values and Judeo-Christian values and alert people like you and people like me to this end. So we'll just have to watch that. Maybe we can come back and do a segment, get Beau French on here and learn more. So that's a summary of what's going on. We have Trump, who has yet to endorse. We're in week 4. We have Cornyn, who's clearly looking wounded and weak. The prediction markets have now put Paxton ahead. I think all of us in our gut realize that Paxton is ahead, and it's trending that way, just primarily because of who turns out. It isn't the country club Republicans. It's the hardcore policy-oriented people who disproportionately turn out in a runoff as opposed to the primary election. And then we have the flip side of that, and this argument that Cornyn will do better against Talarico. It doesn't matter to me who the nominee is. Talarico is going to lose because Texans aren't going to vote for a guy who says there's a male, a female, and 4 other genders, and science mandates that, and science has clearly established that. We aren't going to vote for a guy who says, outside of my family, I care most about trans children. We've rejected that. We've outlawed it. Then the Republican-led legislature did it, and I give them great kudos. It took a couple sessions. It's kind of like the voter ID fight of years past, but they did it. There's just a rejection of the mainstream, by the mainstream voter, softies, the swing voters, and obviously all the Republicans of these type of beliefs and values. 6 genders, trans children, pronoun-focused, taxpayer-funded pronoun efforts, and ignoring the radicalized Muslims who are killing people here in Texas and across America and saying they're not the threat. The real threat are the white men. It's not going to happen, folks. So I disregard that entirely. He's going to be defeated by whoever the nominee is, and I think it's a hollow argument at best. D.C. might be waking up to that now. All right, we got to move on to another segment, but it does transition well into the war with Iran. This is one of the great terror states in the world, period. No way around it. They have a big arsenal. They have just funded terrorism. They have advanced terrorism. They have threatened terrorism. For the last 40-plus years, they have chanted death to America and burned our flags. Yet, most of the Democrats, and even some Republicans, are opposed to Donald Trump's strikes. I am strongly supportive of the activities in Iran, and I think that we all should be. In 2025, when the U.S. and Israel did joint strikes to eviscerate Iran's nuclear sites and capabilities, even a Democrat U.S. senator said it was the right thing to do. We can't let these people have nuclear weapons, and we shouldn't. And by the way, Iran has lied and covered up their nuclear program for decades, and we've all known it's happening. The U.S. government's known it's happening. Obama did everything he could to not have to attack them. He sent them over $1 billion in cash, planes that could barely get off the ground, under the guise that they said, okay, we'll stop. And, of course, they didn't. They want nuclear weapons, and they want to threaten us. They have advanced terrorism for 50 years. There's no way around it. So some of the examples of against Americans include what we just talked about a moment ago. In Austin, Texas, a Senegalese radical guy wearing a sweatshirt that says Property of Allah with a T-shirt under it that has an Iranian flag on it. Kills 3, injures 14, just starts mowing people down. Iran has backed Hamas with money and with guns. Hamas has killed Americans going back to 2015. A U.S. citizen and his wife were traveling in Israel. They were killed in a drive-by shooting. They've been targeting Americans forever and a day. They kill American security contractors, wounded many others in Iraq in December of 19. They pledged publicly that they were going to kill Donald Trump, the head of a foreign rogue nation that has tens of billions of dollars available to it because of its oil, and they have a massive population. They said, we're going to kill your president. They kidnap or attempt to kidnap Americans on U.S. soil, hire people locally to follow them and try to kidnap them, abduct them, take them to Iran to kill them, no doubt, torture them and to kill them. There have been indictments by Iranian intelligence and their 3 or 4 underlings for doing that in New York City and in Brooklyn. 2022, the Houthi attacks killed Americans in Dubai, injured a number of other people, Americans as well, I believe. 23, Hamas in Israel, they killed over 1,000 people. They were the funders of the October, they being Iran, funders and the suppliers of weapons, the Hamas, who invaded Israel on October 7th of 2023, killed over 1,200 people, took another 250 hostage. This was an Iranian operation. Just like Iran is at war with the U.S. and has been for 40 years. They overran our U.S. embassy and kept those hostages well over a year and paraded them around on national TV and burned flags and have taunted us. They have consistently, they being Iran, attacked U.S. bases all over the world, often in the Middle East. They have proxies that are clearly accountable for over 150 attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East. Over 150 in the last 5 years. They've killed 3 U.S. Servicemen outside of this war. So what are we doing when we're saying, oh, we shouldn't be there? I mean, these guys are international terrorists. Even a Democratic senator, John Fetterman, by the way, the same guy who says, of course you should have a photo ID to vote. I'll vote for it. I mean, it just makes sense. Yet many Republican rhinos can't get there. John Fetterman, from a Democrat from Pennsylvania, U.S. senator, saying, yes, it's the right thing to do to strike Iran. Yes, we should have a photo ID. And a whole bunch of rhinos in Washington, D.C. won't go as far as he on either of the issues. That's shocking to me. And anybody who comes out publicly and says, we're going to kill your president, and probably has the means to do it, or at least come close and really try to do it, we should all take that as a threat on our nation, period. So Homeland Security has reported many times in the last 4 or 5 years that U.S. and law enforcement, in conjunction with the Homeland Security team, have disrupted many lethal Iranian-backed plots inside the U.S. I mean, these are years-long operations sometimes, where the Iranian government is pumping money and craziness into people to attack us here. They've hired criminals. They're using operatives. These are terrorist proxies. Frankly, once these people act, they become terrorists. It's treasonous. This guy who killed everybody in Austin a few weeks ago, it's treasonous. That's a terrorist act. Same thing happened in Old Dominion, Virginia recently. Same thing happened in Michigan. The media doesn't want to cover it. And the left obviously is funding these massive protests against Israel and against the U.S. and against anything that has any common sense in terms of military strategic value. None of us want oil to be this expensive, but it is what it is, and we can't live with terrorists determining the will of the world or determining the will of America. This is a long series of events where the Biden folks and the Obama folks and some of the Bush folks, frankly, were too soft and weak. And I'm proud to have a president who has the courage to go and take action. So Iran is a full-on terrorist state, and to the extent that anybody is defending them, none of us want any of our children to die. But these are soldiers, and some have died, and more will. But we have to eradicate a terrorist state. The proverbial head must be cut off of this snake, because they are advancing terrorism here. They've been advancing terrorism for 50 years. They just slaughtered about 15,000 of their own people who are marching against them. We can't let it exist. And I'm praying that President Trump does not surrender to the D.C. swamp and back off. We're in it now. Let's see it through. That is Iran. All right, folks, we got to move through this notion of big business versus free enterprise. First and foremost, those are not the same. Somewhat esoteric, but really important, right? Milton Friedman was the quintessential free enterprise is what brings a market into compliance. Free enterprise is not big business. More often than not, big business says, hey, we've got a bunch of employees, we've got a bunch of money, we have a bunch of power. We want government to work for us, to make it easier for us to sell our product or service. That is big business. Free enterprise says, hey, I'm Anthony. I want to open a barbershop. It's easy to open a barbershop. Government doesn't get to impede me. I have very little licensure requirements, and I don't have to wait long. Now I'm going to go out there and I'm going to compete. I'm going to compete against big business, maybe a franchise of barbershops or hair places. Or inversely, I want to go and start a little drilling company, oil and gas company, and I'm going to do it and compete with Chevron. That sounds outrageous, but it happens, right? And that brings efficiency into the market. Big business, the Chevrons of the world, go to a legislature or a U.S. government or other policy force and say, hey, we don't want all these competitors. We want to make it more difficult for them, because that way it's easier for us to create profit. I'm suggesting to this audience and to, as I have many times, to the legislature, that Texas is actually a regime of big business. And when I say a regime, I mean the Texas legislature and the forces empowered in Texas. We tend to bend the knee to big business. And when I say bend the knee, we should honor employers, right? We should do what we can to ensure our economy is growing. Zero question about that. So when I use a phrase like bend the knee, a criticism, it's very deliberate, and it's deliberate to this end. What we should not be doing is impeding free enterprise. We should not say, oh, you're a big company, you have a whole bunch of employers. We're going to pass laws and regulations to make it more difficult for others to come and compete with you. This is where kind of my antitrust hat goes. You know, I'm this antitrust geek in that I have an LLM, a Master's of Law in Antitrust, which means after law school, I actually went out and, and did what is about a 2-year program to have a master's of this subject matter of antitrust. So, and I did it because of the principles of economics behind it. We have to ensure that our marketplaces are open for competitors to come in, because that's how you and I, the consumers, get the lowest price for goods and services. And by the way, we also get the highest quality. Not only do prices come down, but quality goes up because you find an equilibrium. When government, the state of Texas or the Public Utility Commission or some regulatory agency, sets up impediments to competition, what that means is they're creating impediments to the free market. They're minimizing the area of Texas that has a free market system, and they're trying to protect a large established company, the big business model. So I suggest, and I have a lot of data to back this up, that Texas is not actually a regime of free market systems. It is a regime primarily geared toward big business. Now, it's worked very well. We have a lot of big business in Texas, and we have a lot moving here. And by the way, catering to big business is better than not catering to big business while also suppressing the free market system. But instead, we have catered to big business while suppressing the free market system. And what does that mean specifically to suppress the free market system? We happen to be one of the most regulated states in the union. I'll bet few of you knew that. We require licenses for almost everything, and it takes months and months to get them. We are a heavily regulated state in terms of licensure. We also tend to mandate industries that have layers of sales, so basically everybody gets their slice. So what does this mean? Alcohol, for example, or automobiles. Tesla is such an anomaly in Texas because they're doing direct to consumers. Almost every, and they basically got a carve out to be able to do it. Almost every auto dealer, you have a manufacturer, call it a Ford, out of Michigan. That's the manufacturing entity. And then it comes to the second actor, which is an auto dealer. And it turns out in Texas, it's effectively illegal for us to go and buy straight from the manufacturer a car. And of course, it would be cheaper than buying it from a dealership. Texas mandates these tiered systems in a whole bunch of industries. I've just talked about automobiles, so we also have it at alcohol. That's why it was such a brouhaha 20 years ago when like, what is it, Wine Direct, shipping alcohol directly to Texas. We were one of the last ones that would permit it because you have a manufacturer of alcohol, wine or spirits or a beer or anything, and then you have a distributor. So there's the next step, and it's illegal for any of us to buy from a manufacturer. And it has to go, and it's illegal for us to buy, as I understand, from a distributor. Then the distributors have to effectively resell it to retail outlets, and only then can we buy it. So there's these 3 layers of this product, and everybody has to get their profit, as opposed to a Tesla who just says, I'm going to set it up right here. You can come get it, and we're going to cut out the middleman. A free enterprise market would cut out the middleman. It would not create laws and regulations that allow everybody to get their little slice. Why? Because that product or service coming to you, the end user, is marked up as a result. because everybody has to get their profit. So this is most common in Latin American countries. Panama and Argentina, and Mexico, where everybody gets their slice, and you can't do it. But Texas, oddly, even though we have this national reputation, has a big free marketplace and pro-business, and we are certainly pro-business. Recently, in the last 5 years, we have passed, Texas legislature, for example, passed bills that the judges you and I used to elect, some of them we don't get to elect anymore. They're now appointed by the governor. And the governor obviously happens to be Abbott, but at some point it might be a Democratic governor. So what we did is the legislature went and created special courts just for big business. And they said, and guess what? Those judges won't be elected. They'll be appointed by the governor. And guess what else? Their appointment will only last for 2 years. So if you've got a big business dispute, and I believe the threshold is if it's over $25 million or more, then you get the specialty court that is effectively controlled by the governor, because every 2 years he can replace that judge. So if you're a big business and you don't like what you're getting in that court, and by the way, most litigation takes way more than 2 years, certainly with a 25 million plus dispute. Hey, maybe you have a friend in the governor and you get a new judge. Like we've created a whole new system for big business just to have their own courtroom. We have created a system where all of these mom and pop shops have to wait months and months and get licensed and inspected for all sorts of things. I mean, if you want to be a pet groomer, you want to trim the nails of a dog, I'm virtually certain you have to be licensed in Texas. And of course, a beautician and a makeup artist. This is all licensed and regulated. We had Shelley Luther on here, a state representative, a couple of weeks ago, who had an incredible story, right? She had a salon where a whole bunch of people were cutting hair during COVID. They shut down as they were instructed to do, but after a few weeks, her people, single moms primarily, they were going to go hungry. They live week to week quite often. And she said, I wasn't cutting hair. I'm a makeup artist, professional makeup artist. Well, it turns out all these are regulated by the state of Texas. People were afraid to lose their license. Ultimately, she had to open her shop so that people could eat, and she went to jail for it. Right? She spent a couple nights in Dallas jail and was on national news and international news, and frankly got elected to the Texas legislature. I'm real glad that profile person is in here. But that's an example of the many, many regulatory obstacles and licensure mandates and other impediments that Texas as a state has forced upon the free market system. It is just shocking. We are a state of business. 100%. And I'm quite proud of that. A lot of transactions occur here, but we're primarily a state of big business. And that's why companies are moving from Delaware to Texas, because we're creating specific laws for big business to say, hey, we're going to protect you. Hey, you're going to get your own judges. Hey, nobody can sue you if you harm folks. Hey, we're going to do this. Hey, we're going to do that. Don't worry. You can get insured here because we're going to make sure that folks can't sue you. And we have made sure that folks can't sue you. So your insurance costs will go down because, frankly, if you hurt somebody, there's really no access to a material recovery. And often there's not even access to a courtroom to get to a jury. So we are a regulatory state of big business. And as Americans and entrepreneurs, I suggest to you that what we should seek to achieve is to be a nation and a state of free enterprise. You're listening to Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. If you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, please do. Go to politicswiththebigdogs.com. Consider also please joining the effort to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. This is occurring when your tax dollars are weaponized at the local level. They hire outside lobbyists to lobby the legislature, often for more taxes. The local county and cities have all these third-party lobbyists who are all Austin insiders, and they give them a whole bunch of money to say, hey, help me make sure that I get to increase taxes and regulate my people more. And they do. So it's this circular windfall. It's really disgusting. Most people didn't really understand it happened. Join up, and all of our podcasts are we're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, we're out there, Truth Social. But our podcasts are also hosted on all of the big sites. We have 25 or 30 different shows. Make sure you're catching up on anything that you missed. But Texas, going back to it, we need to make sure in Texas and in America that we internalize and are principled advocates for a free enterprise, a competitive system with the fewest amount of impediments. Second to that, big business is pretty nice. There's no way around it. We have a nice world here in Texas, but that is not America. We are a mom and pop. Get out there and figure out how to do it on your own. Not, I inherited $100 million. I'm going to start a company because I can, right? And that's the model that Texas is moving to, particularly with these so-called business courts, which are, okay, if you're a big business, you got $25 million or more, we don't like what we're getting out of these judges, so we're going to create a new system. Abbott's going to appoint it, or the governor's going to appoint it. It happens to be Abbott. And if we don't like it, then we're going to just try to get a new judge 2 years later because it's a 2-year appointment. And we allowed it to happen. They stripped us of our right to elect our judges. Why? Because they wanted to protect big business. I just suggest to us that we should be protecting free enterprise instead of big business. We'll get better value for our families. We'll get better value for the taxpayer. We'll get better value for America because that's what we are. We are a nation of entrepreneurs. And if you're coming here and you don't come here to join our values, you should just be rejected, period. If you're another faith, fine. But you need to honor our values. That should be the draw to come to America. And free enterprise is one of our values. So, folks, we've got to pay real close attention to what's going on at the Texas legislature and the regulatory agencies in Texas because I was going to say there was a movement, but it's done. We are already a state of big business and at the expense of free enterprise. That is not good for Texas. All right, folks, I was really eager to get us to Beau French and that runoff. I was eager to get in some of the vaccine, but we're just not going to have time. So we're going to have to, I'm hoping to have some of the vaccine for choice folks on perhaps even next week. We need to get into this vaccine issue because they're still forcing sticks in Texas. They're forcing some folks to take vaccines or they're not able to get educated. And that's fundamentally wrong. You know, the state government was way, way behind on this in Texas. Governor Abbott in particular shut down so much of the economy and was very, very delayed, kept us in a state of crisis or a state of emergency, I think, for like 2.5 or 3 years. It was wild. It was all based on COVID. So we need to get into it. We need to recognize it as a group. We need to have our eyes and ears open and ensure that we're affecting change. But we're running out of time in this show. So we're going to have to pick those up. Remember our recap. We're on week 4. President Trump has not endorsed Cornyn or Paxton. I'm not sure that he will. The predictive markets now show Paxton up materially. I suggest that it doesn't matter who the nominee is. That person is going to defeat Talarico because he's out there saying science has definitively shown that we have 6 genders, right? And what's important to me, who's important to me? Trans children. And trans people need access to abortions too. That just doesn't fly. Please go to politicswithbigdogs.com, sign up, join our newsletter. I appreciate you. Thank you so much, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.